Somewhere in an open field in 1943, an old villager reprimands two Belarusian boys for digging around instead of staying indoors. They ignore him and look for abandoned rifles in a sand-filled trench. Their tireless endeavor in the middle of the heat is not in vain, as they believe that once they arm themselves with these weapons, they will be admitted into the Soviet partisan forces. There is a considerable risk that the Germans will discover what they are doing, so they hide when they hear any noise. By a stroke of luck, one of the boys, Flyera, finds an SVT-40 rifle. As they feel overjoyed by an exceptional find, an FW-189 aircraft flies overhead and sees them. They later go back home, unfazed by this. In his home the following day, Flyera's mom is devastated in finding out that her son wants to participate in the war. Surprisingly, she picks up an axe and pleads with him to kill her and his siblings, as their lives will be ruined without him to protect them. With the weapon in hand, he smiles at his two sisters and remains seated, refusing to do anything. She immediately freaks out and protests that she will not allow him to leave. Later, two partisans arrive at his house to conscript him. He gets ready and shows the men his newly acquired rifle. They explain the gravity of the situation to him as the mother offers one of the men drink milk. She grows distraught while comforting her children as the men take Flyera out and bring him with them. He gets injured, hitting his head on the ground. His mom's outbursts are heard around the village, and people gather and gossip as he is loaded in a cart filled with hay and another man lying down. Though a bit sad, he sees his family and his young friend watch him on from a distance. At the partisan campsite, Flyera becomes thrilled to become a low-rank militiaman and perform menial tasks. He looks around to see many recruits enjoying being a part of the cause, even riding on top of tanks. He walks further and gets invited to join a photo opportunity to showcase their unity against the German invasion. As the photo is taken, the USSR war anthem plays. Later at dusk, the partisan commander, Kozak, asks his name and orders him to shoot anyone who does not stop and recite the password to enter. As the man leaves, a young girl follows him, and he tries to question her but is ignored. The next day, Flyera is hard at work washing a steel basin. He feels jealous of the other young men fawning over the girl he saw the other night. Just then, she walks up to him and scatters the basin with a clump of baby's breath. Afterward, the whole platoon gathers for a meeting. The chief informs them about the dangers of fighting against Hitler and his army. Kozak follows up by ordering him to exchange his boots with another soldier's worn-out pair and to be the only one staying behind while the rest of the march for battle. Bitterly disappointed, he walks into the murky forest weeping. Suddenly, he hears the young girl crying in the distance, and upon meeting, they enjoy a good cry followed by a bit of laughter. She finally introduces herself as Glasha and says he was left behind because, in Kozak's eyes, he looked too weak to fight and pitted him. After dismissing what she says as a lie, he notices Glasha acting strangely and going so far as to grab his hand grenade so he can blow them up into pieces. He finds out that she is just joking around as she laughs at him for being too cowardly. They bond a bit after that when suddenly, they look up and see German paratroopers and dive bombers from the sky. Immediately, the camp is bombarded by a surprise air raid. As smoke fills the area, he is partially deafened from the explosions before the two of them hide in the forest to avoid the German soldiers firing from all over the place. He gets an idea to build a camouflaged shelter made up of big leaves for them to wait out in the forest until help arrives. Visibly frightened, she lies with him in a tight embrace, with his jacket as a blanket. They keep quiet as they hear a noise from outside, which turns out to be coming from a stork searching for food. At daylight, the pair clean themselves up by shaking the trees that stored rainwater from their tops and letting it fall. He is amused as Glasha dances around in her wet clothes and keeps their spirits up. Walking limp, he later travels with her to his village, only to find his home deserted, with his family nowhere in sight. In the meantime, he prepares her some leftover soup his mom made so that they can recharge for a moment. After a glimpse of his sister's toy dolls, he freaks out, denying that his family is dead. Just then, he thinks and realizes that he might have been hiding on a nearby island across a bog. As they run from the village in the direction of the bogland, Glasha glances across her shoulder, seeing a pile of executed villagers' bodies stacked behind a house, but does not alert him. Without hesitating, they hurriedly wade through the muddy bogland to reach the other side. The pair soon become hysterical after crossing over, where Glasha screams at Flyera that his family is dead in the village, resulting in the latter attempting to drown her. Nearby, a partisan fighter named Rubas approaches and rescues her from the bog. She furiously calls him out for almost killing her, believing he is going crazy. The soldier then takes them to a large group of villagers who have fled the Germans, many shouting that everyone they know has died. He then sees the old village elder, who had previously warned him and his friend about the German invasion, badly burnt after the bombing raid. He tells him that he witnessed his family's execution and should have never dug up the rifles. The young recruit is in total shock hearing this awful news and so attempts to commit suicide out of guilt by burying his head in the mud. Glasha and the villagers save him and later feed him as he comes to terms with reality. Rubas shaves off bits of his hair, which are buried on the ground as a symbol of his survival. Carrying along a scarecrow made to resemble Hitler, Rubas takes Flyara and two other men set off to find food at a nearby warehouse, only to find it guarded by German troops who shoot right at them. They flee into the thick forest and hide there for the night. The next day, they see a passing tank on a dirt road and get the idea to post the scarecrow in the middle of the crossing for the German vehicles to see. During the rest of the retreat, the group wanders through a minefield with Russian flyers all over the ground, indicating friendly troops have recently been to the area. Dusk falls, and the group decides to make a run for it across the dirt road, but two of the men carelessly step into a mine, resulting in their deaths. Rubas and Flyara carry on alone as they try to sneak up to an occupied village and steal a cow from a collaborating farmer. Overjoyed, they milk the cow and quench their thirst a bit. Just then, an aircraft flies past them and shoots Rubas dead, leading to Flyara being defenseless. And so he crawls forward to grab the cow, but it also falls after getting hit by enemy gunfire. He then weeps in the darkness, as a bunch of flares lights up in the sky. The following day, after sleeping atop the dead cow, he makes the journey alone in a fog. He then stumbles upon a horse cart and attempts to steal it, but the owner catches him and demands him to stop. He sees that he is a soldier, so instead of harming him, he helps him construct a new identity to blend in. Using the fog to cover their tracks, they rush toward his home in the small village of Perkety and hide with other family members until a German SS unit shows up out front. Accompanied by collaborators from the Russian Liberation Army and Schutzmannschaft Battalion 118, they surround and occupy the village, asking all the citizens to provide documentation. A German official then walks into the house, where he and his companions are being offered food and schnapps. He looks scared but also disillusioned by the fact that some Russians are willing to help the Germans. As he is pushed out of the house, he gets up and warns the townsfolk they are being herded to their deaths. He is grabbed by one of the soldiers, who threatens to kill him and drags him to their holding area. While the men are asked to march in groups, the women and children frantically line up to show some papers, believing they will flee safely to Germany. As a symbol of the successful takeover, an injured farmer is made to hold up a sign proclaiming Hitler as the liberator of the village. Later, everyone, including Flyara, is detained inside a wooden church and panics as they attempt to escape. An official tries to calm the crowd by offering anyone to leave through a small window, provided they will leave the children behind. Since he is alone, he courageously climbs out the window but is brought in front of the SS commander. A young girl is allowed to escape the church, but unfortunately, she gets dragged by her hair and loaded into a truck to be sexually assaulted. He looks on helplessly, forced to watch soldiers throw several Molotov cocktails and grenades onto and within the church before it is further set ablaze with a flamethrower as other soldiers shoot into the building. The Germans applaud for a job well done as the church and the rest of the village are completely decimated. A while later, a German officer points a gun to Flyara's head to pose for a picture before slumping him to the ground and fainting as the soldiers leave. A scout on a motorbike then makes fun of him by kicking him in the rear before driving off. As one last act of hatred, some soldiers carry a sickly old woman lying in her bed and leave her outside to die. Flyara later wanders out of the scorched village in the direction of the Germans, where he discovers they had been ambushed by the partisans. With no one to stop him, he grabs some bandages inside a German official's bag and eventually recovers his jacket and rifle in the hay field. In a stunning development, he discovers that the young girl had survived but looks at a loss for words, with her legs and face covered in blood after being sexually assaulted and brutalized by the soldiers. Later, he makes it back to the village and finds that his fellow partisans, led by Kozak, have captured 11 of the Germans and their collaborators, including the Nazi commander, and SS Sturmbannführer. While some of the arrested men, including the commander and principal collaborator, plead for their lives and deflect blame, a young fanatical Obersturmführer is unapologetic and defiantly vows they will carry out their genocidal mission no matter the cost. After some never-ending pleas and denials, Kozak makes the collaborator douse the Germans with a can of petrol brought by a visibly disturbed Flyara. They freak out and beg for mercy as a torch is brought in, but some disgusted crowd shoots them before they can be set on fire. Despite the partisans' victory, a traumatized Flyara ends up speechless by what he had witnessed. As everyone leaves, he notices a framed portrait of Adolf Hitler in a puddle and proceeds to shoot it numerous times out of anger. As he does so, he thinks about the life of Adolf Hitler flashing before his eyes in reverse. Afterward, he stops shooting and sobs, wondering if everything he has done is all in vain. He then rushes to rejoin his comrades, and they march through the birch woods as snow blankets the ground. During the Great Patriotic War, also known as World War II, the inhabitants of 628 Belarus villages were burned alive by the Nazis. This part of history occurred on the 22nd of March 1943, now known as the Katyn Massacre. These are the real horrors of the World War that will forever haunt the world until this day, and may it be a war that will never happen again.